always harping about voltage drop, and that's what we do a lot. Now this particular one here, hold that meter so that he can see it. All right, now what we're going to do here is we're going to see how much power we got right there. We got 12.3 volts on this 2006 Sonata. All right, and look how I'm going to have to do this where we can see. I'm going right here. Okay, now then, and you know Derek kind of knows where this is going because he's been here. If I wanted to check voltage drop between here and here, and I was going to spin the engine, I need to spin the engine. I need current flowing so I can do that. Although the engine here is not going to spin, I can tell you right now, because it's got issues. All right, now the interesting thing about this is, if I take this particular thing right here, this meter right here, and I check, if I'm going to check voltage drop between here and the starter, I'd obviously go here, and then I go to the big wire on the starter, right? Wherever it's at. I may have to hook an alligator clip to it or something like that. And then I would read my meter over there whenever I was doing that. Now in this particular case, I'm actually going to look at this right here. I'm going to touch that right there, and I'm going to see a little something there. See that? What am I seeing there?
130.
Okay, now I'm going to take it right here. My goodness, look at that. Now what am I touching? What am I touching that's giving me that reading?
Ground.
I'm going from ground to the engine block, right? From ground to the engine block. You see where we're at? Now let's do this a simpler way where we'll more understand what's going on. I'm going to go from ground to there. Now watch this. What in the world is that about? Does that make any sense? Should I see the test light lighten up when I touch the engine block? I should not ever see that. All right. Now if you go in there and try to start it, do you think it's going to start? Why will it not start? Because it ain't grounded. Okay, so there you go. Now then, it's fairly easy when you go about this the right way to find out. At least you can check the stuff you can see pretty easy. I'm going to go here. I got a good ground there, right? Show my just out here. Then I'm going to go here. Then I'm going to go here. So far, so good, right? But now watch this. I got nothing there. Okay, now can you tell me why this lights up when I go from ground to here? It's trying to find ground, and it's getting through this bulb. That's the only place it can get a ground, through that bulb. Right? In other words, the whole block's hot. See that? Now this is important, because if you ever run into a situation where the starter doesn't work, like I told you about Spanky had this little Mustang, and so what he did was he was only checking the hot side. All right, so he goes under, it's like this, you know. So he goes under there and he gets on the starter with his test light, and he checks to see if there's a, you know, he's hooked to here. Yes, he's got power at the starter, at the big wire. He goes to the little wire that energizes the solenoid. Yes, he's got power there, so it has to be the starter, right? So he spends a couple hours changing out the starter, and it's not easy on this Mustang Saline. You know, it's a big job, and the car's nearly brand new. So he gets the starter changed out. He gets it all put back together. Didn't bench test the starter when he pulled it off. He just swapped it out. So he goes to start it just like it would, just like it would. All right. And so Donnie comes over here, and he gets a test light and hooks it here, and he does this. And he said, "There's your problem." See how easy that was? And you know, on that particular one, that ground wire was going to the side of the engine block, and they had used a bolt that was anodized with something that didn't conduct worth a flip. I don't know where they got it. They had, the engine block was painted, and it was just so that that bolt looked clean and tight, just like this one does, but there was no current flowing. See what I mean? And you wouldn't think, just looking at it, there was a problem. But when you get to checking, you got it ground here, you know, the engine block's hot, but the ground is showing good. So anyway, just always remember that. This is the ultimate voltage drop test here. We're going to do let's hold that again. Hold that again. And sometimes you can go right to it. The most negative part of your circuit is this post, and you're going to go to that. See, look at there. I'm reading 11 volts there. I shouldn't be dropping all of the voltage, and whatever little bit of a whisper of current is going to other parts on here is enough to where it's causing that to happen. Now, I doctored this in order to get you to understand that. Basically what I did was, I did a little, somewhere here, see that little plastic washer? I made some of those. And I made a bad connection there. And did it smack you around? You figured it out real quick, didn't you? What about you? Did you find it real quick?
I figured out what was wrong when it wouldn't start.
Yeah. You went to Identifix, and Identifix says make sure your block is...
I had one problem where it was usually the fuel pump or the wiring or the assembly, and the one negative battery cable not grounded was one problem. That's what this is.
That's right. Now that's voltage drop. Now then, now let's walk over here. All right, stop your tape and restart it when I tell you to. Go. Now what we got here is we got a no start. Okay, I want to get you guys to give me some feedback on this. If I got a no starter, and I'm going to check it to find out why it's not starting, what's the first thing I want to know? What's the first thing I want to know, huh?
It's got spark.
Well,
Battery's any good.
Bingo. All right. And how do we know? We want to make sure, and we're gonna get our meter over here. We're gonna put this on 20-volt scale, right? All right. Now go to the two posts on your battery. All right. Go to the two posts on your battery, and plug that starter solenoid back in over there. Somebody's got it unhooked. Right over there, right here, right over there. The starter wire is unplugged. Plug it back in. That little elbow-shaped rubber thing. All right, hook it to both of the posts on your battery. Derek, hold that so the camera can see the voltage there. Okay, right there. Now, what we want to know, spin it over, George. We want to make sure that battery voltage stays up above 9.6 volts while we're spinning it, okay? We're going to make sure. Let's spin it over. Does it click? It is clicked. We got a bad connection? Okay, look over there. Let's do a voltage drop test on each battery terminal first. All right, what did I show you? Go from the battery post to the battery terminal, first on the negative side. First on the negative side. All right, now try it, George.
All right, nothing.
What do you see in there?
Nothing.
All right, now go to the other. Go to the positive side. Oh my goodness, look at that. Now look, let him see how you're holding the terminals with his video. I mean, all he sees is a fat hand. Okay, you see that? All right, now what are we losing? We're losing a bunch of voltage right there, aren't we? That's what it looks like when your battery terminal is ready. Jiggle that battery terminal, twist it, do something with it. Let's see if we can get past that part. All right, now measure it. See what you see. What are you seeing now? George, try to start it. Oh, okay. See, we had a bad connection to start with. We're going to get past that. Now go to the posts again. Go to your posts. All right, now measure it. All right, go, George. Oh, we've got really good, strong voltage while we're spinning it. That should be good enough, shouldn't it? Okay. Now what are we going to do? We're going to check spark, aren't we? All right, so the smartest way to check spark, I guess, on one that's got a distributor like this one, is to pull that wire right there, like any of them. And I would actually be working on the other side, spinning it with my screwdriver if I'm working by myself. I'm going to take this. You don't have to have a spark tester. You can do it without one. I mean, like, I don't want you guys to get so used to these snazzy little tools to where you feel like, you know, hey, I've got to have a spark tester and I can't do anything because I'm handicapped. You know what I mean? So, all right, so I'm going to take this right here, and we're going to try it again, George. Spin it over. I'm going to stretch the spark while you're spinning it and see how far it'll jump. Come on. Oh, good enough. If it's jumping about 3/4 of an inch and it looks nice and sharp like that, you're in good shape on your spark. Okay. Now, one of the things that we haven't checked is our, timing, but we do hear good compression, right? We don't hear it sitting here acting like some of the cylinders don't have compression and all that, like we would if it had jump time and that kind of stuff. So we got a good, nice, solid spinning sounding engine, and so we know we've got spark. We know we got good battery. We know we got spark. That's one of the things that we're looking at. Okay, the next thing we need to know is if we indeed have fuel pressure. Okay, so take our fuel pressure. Let's took our fuel pressure gauge yet. Alright, we're going to put him a light right there so he can see how to do that. We're connecting our fuel pressure gauge. It won't take him a second to do that. We'll screw in that little, that's the same size as the tire schrader valve, but it's a special thing. Okay, now then, let's look at our pressure. This is a ratty looking old pressure gauge, but we don't care because we're just going to, okay, see if you got, just turn the key on about 4 times and see if the pressure comes up. Now 4 times means just turn on the key, don't spin the engine, okay? Turn on, switch on the key and off. I don't see no pressure at all, do you? Okay, now this one here, this is the reason this one doesn't have pressure, and I did this as an object lesson here. Whenever we're checking this fuel pump relay, the green one on these older Fords is fuel pump. The brown one is EEC power, you know, which there's the brown one. The EEC power relay is what feeds power to all of the red wires, of the injectors, the idle air control, powers up the engine controller and all that. And if these relays, and I want to tell you this, it's really important, if I come to one and it looks like this with these relays hanging upside down like that, I'm going to be thinking, is this waterproof here? This is not a waterproof seal. You're driving down the road, rain's going to blow in here, and it's going to get on these wires, and it's going to trickle down those wires and go right into those relays. So if you got relays that are not in a power junction box or whatever, you need to mount them with tie wraps or whatever so they're vertical like that, so they don't hang like that and get water in them, you know. All right, next thing I like to do is there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, but turn the key on, George. Just switch on the key, but don't start it. All right, now I felt my fuel pump relay click. You probably saw some pressure starting to come up there then, right?
20 pounds.
All right, so watch this. I've got this. Let's say that my fuel pump still wasn't running. Okay, so I can actually run the fuel pump here by using that relay. See that? What do we got for pressure now?
About 30.
About 30 pounds, okay. All right, now this one here, look at here, you might notice that one's hot all the time. If your fuel pump wasn't running and you were still trying to figure it out, you're going to take this right here. I'm going to connect this to that hot wire that I just had right there. And then I'm going to go right here. Now my fuel pump is providing the ground. See, that's ground. My fuel pump is now providing the ground path that's causing this light to burn. If that ground on the other side of that pump is good, and the windings in the pump are good, and the brushes are good, and the wire is good between here and there, and the inertia switch is not tripped, then I'm going to wind up with a light that's burning here. If I check this and I see that I don't have fuel pressure and my light's not burning, I kick the gas tank with my big ugly boot, and if the light comes on then, I know I need a fuel pump. Because it jarred the pump like you would kick a starter and make it start spinning. All right, that's another no start thing here. Bunch of different things. If you don't have fuel pressure, this is kind of how you go about finding it. Occasionally, we'll have one that the fuel pressure will drop away while it's running. We had a Chevrolet pickup that belonged to the one from the other campus. It would just quit while they were driving around town. Well, I parked it in that stall, and I actually went into that little prime place right next to the relay, and with this light burning, I knew it had power to the fuel pump. The gauge was hooked up. With it sitting there idling, after it idled for about 30 minutes, that fuel pressure just went away. Went to nothing. And the fuel, but the power remained constant going to the pump. So I had a bad pump on that one, you see. Now sometimes somebody will say, my car's running really rotten when I'm driving down the road. After a while, it starts to lose power, it starts to cut up, and it makes it where I'll start it and it'll die, I'll start it and it'll die, and it won't go. And I say, okay, so I'm going to put a fuel pressure gauge on it, and I let it sit out there in the service bay, make sure the fan works and it's not going to overheat. And I let it run for like 4 hours, idling, with the fuel gauge hooked up to it. And sooner or later, I'd walk by and I'd see that it had died. And I'd look and the fuel pressure was at 0. And if I heard it die, and I went and saw the fuel pressure was at 0, I'd start it up, fuel pressure would come up, and it would almost immediately go right back to 0. And then I know we needed a fuel pump. And but most of what you got to do in a situation like that, you work smart. You start this car and you got it close by where you can keep an eye on it. You're working on some other cars over there still making your money while this one here is running. See, because there's no point in having a car sitting here 4 hours running with you watching it. That's kind of dumb. Of course, you could have your phone and be doing like this, right, Brandon? All right. Now then, so that's how you're going to do that. You're going to find power. You're going to go to the wire that's feeding the fuel pump, see if it fires up and you got a ground. Okay, I want to show you something really important on this. And there is a hard start worksheet that I gave you guys. This thing should fire up now, if everything being equal. We got good spark, and nobody's moved the distributor. Oh, this is something else. If you're looking at one and you can tell somebody has put new plug wires and a new cap and a new rotor and everything on it, and even if they put a new ignition module on it, you might want to make sure that they got the timing right, because sometimes that'll happen. If the timing's a little bit retarded, what does it do? on this engine over here, put it together, time is a little bit retarded, it'll spin and spin and spin and spin and spin, and it won't start until you advance the timing a little. You know what I'm talking about? Fire it up, George, and let's watch this fuel pressure really close. Now, does anybody see anything wrong with that? Have you ever noticed how when it's sitting out here, if this vehicle's been sitting out there for a while and you're going to start it, if you notice how it spins and spins and spins and spins before it starts, what you're looking at right there is the reason for that. What's the fuel pressure?
About 25.
That is too low. It's not supposed to be 25. It ought to be 30 when the engine's idling. It ought to go to 40 when you unplug the regulator. For some strange reason, and I didn't make this happen, this thing's got 10 pounds less fuel pressure than it's supposed to have. And that's going to make it stall after you start it cold. That's going to make it start hard. It's going to cause all kinds of problems because it doesn't have enough fuel pressure. As a matter of fact, you can pull that vacuum line off that fuel pressure regulator while it's running, and when it jumps up to 30 pounds, you'll hear the engine change the way it's running. See? Now, occasionally you'll have one that sits up a lot that will have injectors that are partially clogged. Now, this one here doesn't have that problem. It's got low fuel pressure. But how would you do a voltage drop test on this fuel pump relay? Somebody tell me, this fuel pump relay, I want to do a voltage drop test on it. George, would you know how to do that? You know how to do a voltage drop test, don't you? How do you do a voltage drop test on anything?
You check your ground and power.
Well, you're going to go on both sides of where your suspected resistance is and see what your voltage is, right? Now, where's our meter at? We got it somewhere close by? We lose our meter? That's it, our $17 meter's gone. You see, I buy $17 meters because I don't see any point in having 8 or 10 fluke meters in here for people to run over with cars and steal and all this kind of stuff. Nobody ever steals one of these because it doesn't cost but about 17 bucks to buy a brand new one. All right? And it does what we need to do. Furthermore, I like to be able to have people set their own meter instead of having to look at an auto ranging meter and figure out what range it is. That's not a bad skill to have. Okay, I'm going to go on here. Now, George, take that. I mean, you hold the meter. And George, you see them two wires right there? The little wires on that relay are the coil. And if you see a relay, it's got two little pins, the two big pins, the two little pins are always going to be the coil. You got that? The two little pins are always the coil, the two big pins are going to be the load carrying terminals, right? So we also call the little coil terminals the primary, and we call the big terminals the secondary. Oh, George, take those. All right, you're going to go from one big terminal to the other one. From that one to that one. All right, now then, you're expecting to see 12 volts there. That doesn't mean you're dropping 12 volts. It just means that you're actually reading between the fuel pump and the power like I did with the test light. Now then, Derek, go around there and turn the key on this thing so that the relay energizes and the fuel pump runs. We're seeing 12.4 volts over here. When he turns it on, all right, go ahead and start the engine. Now the problem with that, if you had low fuel pressure back there, you need to make sure you're getting all the fuel. All we were basically checking as far as this whole circuit goes between here and the pump, we're only just checking the relay and that's it. If these relay contacts get dirty and they start dropping voltage so that you got high resistance here, if you've got lower voltage going to your pump, lower voltage means what?
Fuel pressure.
Lower fuel pressure. Now what did we have on our Ranger? We had the thing dropping out because we had a bad ground. Remember that the other day when I did that other video? How we actually used a headlight bulb and we hooked it up with in place of the fuel pump. And when we turned on our key, the headlight bulb wouldn't burn. But when we checked it with this test light, it looked like we had power there. We took this little test light, which pulls, less than an amp, and we hooked it up between the ground and the power at the fuel pump itself, and it lit the test light. But when we plugged it back into the pump wouldn't run, and there was no measured voltage. All right, so I hooked the 4 amp headlight bulb up, which pulls about the same thing as the pump does on that one, and it wouldn't burn because there wasn't enough of a ground there for it to carry that load. Then we ran another ground wire. I think Derek worked on that through there and hooked up to the ground to the frame We didn't have to go find out where the bad ground was. We just ran a separate ground. Didn't hurt a doggone thing. All right, if you do it right. On that Chevy's now, if you ever pull a fuel pump off Chevy's, there is a ground wire, and you've seen this, a ground wire that comes off of the doggone pump and goes right there to the frame. And if you forget that, how many times have you seen the end snatched off that ground wire? You know what I mean? Every time somebody pulls that tank off, if they don't know about that ground wire, you know, they just jerk it, slam off there. And Chevy was wanting to know, but remember that on that GMC, there is a wire coming off of there that goes over in front. Anyway, on your no start though, what are we saying? Let's rehash this. We want good strong batteries. We're going to check that with that. We want, and also if your starter's got to be spinning it at a decent speed. What else? What are we doing next?
Pretty blue spark.
Pretty blue spark, and it's always important to check spark before you check the fuel because you don't want to set the motor on fire. Okay, then you're going to check fuel pressure, right? What if you have good spark, strong battery, good spark, good fuel pressure? What you going to check next?
Fuel pressure.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually check and see if the injectors are clicking. Are the injectors clicking? Next thing I'm going to check and see if the injectors aren't clicking. I might even hook my scan tool up and see if it'll talk. You know, usually first time when most technicians, first thing they grab is a scan tool. You know, just plug it in and see what it'll do. If the scan tool won't talk, a lot of them are sunk. They don't know where to go. You know, I mean, you can have a $7,000 Snap-on scan tool, and if it won't talk, you know, it's, at that particular point in time, it gets set aside, and you got to get this stuff out. Okay, what are we going to check? Let's say that we've got power at our injectors, and let's say our injectors are clicking. All right, and let's say that our scan tool will talk. And let's say we're going to look at our scan tool, we're going to look at our engine coolant, we're going to look at our intake air, we're going to look at our transmission oil temperature, if it's got that on it, and we're going to compare those three. What should we see if that vehicle's been sitting there 4 hours? Those are temperature sensors. And we all understand the second law of thermodynamics. All the temperatures are going to be the same at all those sensors if it's been sitting there 4 hours. If I see two of them reading 55 degrees and the next one reading 101, I know there's something wrong. And that's going to make it run bad too. You got it? All right, so let's say all of that worked out. We got all that done. Now what are we going to do? I used to have students that would ask me, you know, when we were working on one, they'd say, what are we going to do next? And I'd say, well, we're going to check such and such. And they say, what you going to do if I don't fix it? And I say, well, if I don't fix it, I'll check this. And they'll say, what you going to do if I don't fix it? And I say, look, you could ask those questions all the way to infinity. You do the next thing. That's what you do. You do the next thing, and you evaluate your data. Every piece of data is important, though, so don't forget any piece of data you gathered. Okay, somebody talk to me. We've got everything we need. We can tell by the sound of the engine spinning that we got good, strong compression. We might want to check crank-in vacuum. Let's say it's 4 inches of crank-in vacuum, which is about right for crank-in vacuum. Now what you going to do? Don't run out of ideas now.
Compression.
Huh?
Compression.
Hey guys, I'm going to pull a spark plug out and see if it's wet. Got me?
It's overly flooded.
Yeah. Now, all of this stuff I'm telling you is going to provide you with clues. Okay, let's say this. Let's say that we've got our power at our injectors, but they're not clicking. What are we going to do next? We're going to unplug the throttle position sensor, and with the key on, we're going to use our meter, and we're going to see if we got 5 volts at the throttle position sensor. If we don't, then for some strange reason, the engine controller's asleep. Got it? If you don't have 5 volts at the engine, I mean at the one of the 3-wire sensors, you ought to have that. Now you know you've got what's a 3-wire sensor got going to it?
Power, ground, and signal.
Power, ground, and signal. There you go. So with the power being 5 volts, so it's not 5 volts that will burn a light. You don't ever need to try it because there's no point in measuring that with this. You know, this is what you need to be using now. That's because you're not pulling current, you're just actually sending a signal, and this is how you read something when you're going to send a signal. All right, if I don't see 5 volts there, I need to find out why. And did you know that 5 volts can get shorted to ground somewhere if a wire harness is rubbing or something? Okay, now how am I going to determine if maybe the engine controller is not sending out 5 volts, or if it's shorted to ground? I think I'm going to unplug the engine controller, and I'm going to get my test light now with the engine controller unplugged, and I'm going to hook it to power, and I'm gonna check and see if that 5-volt lead is grounded. If I see a ground then, I know I'm gonna be jiggling wire harnesses while I'm holding that on there and see if that winks out so I can see where the short to ground is. And that happens. Sometimes a wire harness will get against a dadgum aluminum air conditioner line, and it will actually, that aluminum air conditioner line will actually rub a hole in that harness. You'll see copper all over the place. Because some of them harnesses, if it's looped over real tight against an air conditioner line, the air conditioner line's mounted on the body, the engine's doing this, and it rubs it, right? Okay, so let's say you unplug your engine controller and you don't find a ground there, but you plug your engine controller back in and you do. What does that mean? That basically means you've either got a shorted pin coming out of the engine controller, instead of having a 5 volts coming out, you got a short, and you can have a bad 3-wire sensor causing that to happen. You got me? All right. So anybody got any questions about that? Right? Now this is not going to comprehensively cover everything. If everything else is right, but if you don't have spark and you don't have injector pulse and your scan tool will talk, what are you going to look at on the scan tool? RPM. If I see look at the RPM, I don't see it, I could take the 2 wires going to the crank sensor, the blue one and the gray one, and reverse them in that connector. Put them in there backwards, and that vehicle wouldn't start, and most people would run slam out of ideas trying to figure out what's wrong with it. If they're reversed, it's really weird. What you'll see is on your scan tool, if it's a fast one, you'll see the RPM start to count up when you're spinning it, and then it'll drop to nothing, and you won't get no spark, no fuel injection, no nothing. All because the wires are hooked up backwards. Pins 21 and 22, well, like that Sable over. If I swap those around, you can send it to shops all over the country, and they put engine controllers on it, and I mean, because who's going to do that? Well, let's say somebody was inspecting those wires, pulling them out to look at them or maybe fix them, and they put them back in the wrong place. So how do you find a problem like that? It's easier if you've got another car to compare it to, but you better be thinking. I fell in Daniel the other day. I got at the Ford school one time. This guy took an ABS module or whatever it was on his Lincoln, and he moved the pin to an empty cavity that was next to the one it was supposed to be in. That will beat you up. If you're not paying attention to that, it'll get you every time. See what I mean? So you're having to get past this stuff and get to where you understand. Okay, anybody got any questions or comments about that? Did anybody learn anything that they didn't know before? Brandon, be honest. What's this head shaking business I see over there? All right.